We both sat there in silence, our eyes locked onto one another, an unspoken tension hanging between us. It felt as if time had come to a standstill while we struggled to unravel the tangled threads of our shared issues. I couldn't help but ponder the deeper significance of our situation. Why had I been transformed into mere fabric, a cloth devoid of life and agency? And why had fate chosen him to be the boy to whom I was inevitably bound? As I searched for answers to those haunting questions, he opened his mouth as if to speak, but then hesitated, a flicker of doubt crossing his face that made him reconsider his words. I could see the conflict in his eyes, the struggle between wanting to understand and the fear of what the truth might bring. "Eden," he finally murmured, his voice barely above a whisper, "just say it." Timothy glanced up at me, his fingers nervously rubbing against the fabric of his sleeve, a small but telling gesture of his own unease. His gaze was piercing, filled with a mix of curiosity and trepidation. "What are you?" he finally asked, his voice steady but filled with an undercurrent of bewilderment. His question hung in the air, heavy with implications. I felt a pang of confusion course through me. How did one begin to answer such a profound inquiry? The truth was, I had grappled with that very thought for some time now. How could I articulate my identity when I wasn't entirely sure what I had become? I hesitated, wrestling with my own understanding, trying to piece together who I was in this strange, new form. "I wasn't a god anymore," I murmured softly, the weight of those words sinking deep into my chest. "I wasn't the guardian of Earth or mankind. All that was left of me was one thing." I paused, the memories rushing in, almost choking me. "Eden," I continued, my voice distant, "before all this, before you and I became what we are now, I was a god, a protector of civilization, of mankind, of every living thing that grew, that breathed under the blue sky. I was the essence of the earth, the lifeblood of all things natural. But the other gods, they didn't see me as fit anymore, so they stripped me of everything. They turned me into a mere cloth, a simple, floating piece of green, helpless as it drifted down to earth, bound forever to a mortal. To you." Timothy's eyes were wide, his voice barely above a whisper. "Does that mean you created man?" The question hung in the air between us. I couldn't help but laugh bitterly at his words. "No, Timothy," I said, the laughter dying quickly in my throat. "I didn't create mankind. I was made by the same creator as you, born of the same hands. But I had an obligation when I came into existence, something greater, something I was bound to before you ever came to be. Unlike you." Timothy's brow furrowed, his expression a mix of confusion and profound curiosity. His eyes, wide with disbelief, sought answers that seemed too cruel and unfathomable to accept. "But why? Why would they do that to you? Take away your power, your everything?" His voice trembled, raw with sorrow, as though he, too, were feeling the weight of such an unjust betrayal. His words seemed to hang in the air like a question that, despite the years that had passed, still lingered in my soul. The pain that had been buried deep within me stirred at his question, threatening to rise once more. It wasn't just the loss of power that cut through me, nor the stripping away of everything I had known. It was the deep, aching sorrow that accompanied the realization that the very beings who once claimed to be our protectors, the gods who we had served and revered, had turned against us. It wasn't only an attack on my immortality, it was a betrayal of everything I had believed in. I lowered my gaze, my heart heavy, my mind slowly drifting back to that fateful night, the night that had irrevocably altered the course of my destiny. A cold shiver slithered down my spine as the haunting memory surged forth, relentless and uninvited. Even now, years later, the images were sharp, vivid, each detail etched into my mind with painful clarity. "It was because I fell in love with a human woman," I began, my voice barely more than a whisper, laden with a sense of both sorrow and acceptance. The words were slow, deliberate, as though the very act of speaking them would dredge up the flood of emotions I had tried to bury. "And it wasn't just me. One of my brothers did, too." I paused, swallowing the lump that had formed in my throat, knowing that sharing this would bring the past crashing back with full force. The moment my heart had been drawn to her, to a mortal, my fate had been sealed. In the years before the trial, we had roamed the earth with a sense of invincibility, free from the gods' watchful eyes. We were like shadows, slipping through the world, confident in our brotherhood, in our collective power. Our bond had felt unbreakable, forged through countless lifetimes of shared experiences. Our sins, our secrets, seemed as though they would remain hidden forever in the darkest corners of existence. But somehow, against all odds, a flicker of light had pierced the gloom, revealing us to those who had once been our allies. And so, we found ourselves before the council, standing in judgment before the very beings who had once stood by us. Condemned, scrutinized, our fate decided not by our deeds, but by our love for a mortal. I could still feel the weight of those eyes, the cold, unblinking gazes of the gods, as they looked down upon us. I stole a glance at Marilyn, my brother, standing beside me in that austere chamber, the tension thick in the air. "We must stay united, no matter what this trial brings," I whispered to him, my heart pounding in my chest. Fear, that ancient and unwelcome companion, was beginning to settle in my bones. The gods were not merciful. They had never been. And yet, a spark of determination lit within me. I refused to let them tear us apart, not after everything we had been through. Marilyn turned to me, his expression momentarily softening. He offered me a small, reassuring smile, but there was something in his eyes, something hidden beneath the surface. A storm was brewing, one I couldn't yet understand. His voice, quiet but steady, broke through the tension. "I'm not the one you need to be worried about," he said cryptically, his eyes darting away, as if he sensed a danger I could not yet see. His words, though meant to calm me, only left me with a growing sense of unease. I tried to push aside the fear that gnawed at me, focusing instead on the looming trial. We had been brothers, bound together by a bond that should have transcended time itself. Yet, as I stood there, with the gods staring down upon us, I couldn't shake the feeling that something inside us had already begun to unravel. The years of hardship, of struggle, had eroded something deep within us. Some of our bonds had frayed beyond repair. Some scars, no matter how hard we tried, could never heal. The true ache, the deepest wound, came not from the loss of my power, nor from the shattered life I had built. No, the real sorrow lay in the painful clarity that my relationship with my brothers had changed. Perhaps irrevocably. 16 million years of shared existence, of laughter and tears, of victories and defeats, seemed to fade like a distant dream. And I, foolishly, longed for something simpler, something sweeter to replace the bitterness that now filled my heart, something like guava, to mask the sting of that bitter truth. But there was no sweet fruit to dull the pain, no comforting balm to soothe the gaping wound that had been left in the wake of betrayal. There was only the stark, undeniable reality that we could never go back to what we once were. And as I stood there in that cold, unforgiving chamber, the gravity of it all pressed down on me. Our fate, our brotherhood, everything we had once believed in, slipping through our fingers like sand. The trial had begun, and we were already doomed. Cherub, my brother, another member of our fractured kin, was willing to share our story. He was eager to recount the legacy of our trials and tribulations, the hardships we endured, and the choices that defined us. Yet Marilyn, the third of our brothers, remained silent, burdened by a weight that seemed too heavy for anyone to bear. His silence, thick and oppressive, spoke volumes. It was as if the very weight of our past, the echoes of what we had gone through, had rendered him voiceless amidst the chaos that surrounded us. The others, the gods, could not understand the depth of his quiet suffering, but I could feel it, simmering in the air like a storm on the verge of breaking. When they called out our names, mine and Cherub's, without uttering Marilyn's, the truth became painfully clear. My brother, Marilyn's, had found a loophole, but not just any loophole. He had discovered a cunning trick that would lead us all into ruin. It wasn't a mistake, nor was it a simple oversight. Marilyn's had figured out a way to play the system, to use the very rules that were supposed to bind us to our fate against us. But in doing so, he had paved the road to our destruction. Then, with a quiet resolve, Cherub stepped forward. His posture was confident, and his eyes gleamed with a mix of defiance and certainty. It was clear that, in that moment, he had no care for the judgment of these so-called gods, beings who, for all their power, could not understand the complexities of what had driven him to this point. If they looked down upon him, if they thought less of him, it mattered not. He was untouchable in his certainty. With a voice that cut through the tension in the room, Cherub spoke. "I fell in love with a mortal woman," he began, his words sharp and unwavering. She was like a diamond, buried deep within the dirt. A fighter, a woman with a heart full of passion. And as you sit here, wondering why things like sex became love, why love turned into obsession, and obsession into death, know this, it was because of her. She made me feel things I never knew existed. She nourished me, gave me something I had never experienced in all my 500 million years on that planet. She gave me heart, passion, affection, things no immortal had ever given me. And that rare, fleeting spark she gave me, you'll never see it. It's something created by the omnipotent themselves. The entire room grew still. Even the gods, who had seen countless lives, countless stories, were taken aback by the depth of Cherub's words. His gaze hardened as he continued, weaving the tale of how he met her, of how she captured his heart. It was a night by the ocean, he explained. I was simply taking a bath in the luminescent ink of the sea, when her voice caught my attention. She was singing, and I watched as her eyes met mine for the first time. She was unlike anyone I had ever seen before, her eyes full of wonder, her soul untouched by the fear that should have come with encountering someone like me. My hair, dark as a midnight wall, my skin like polished dark brown enamel, shimmering in the moonlight. She saw me, truly saw me, without fear. For a moment, she didn't scream, didn't turn away. She just looked. And that look, that single glance, was enough. At first, Cherub had no interest in her. She was just another mortal, another fleeting thought in the vast expanse of his immortal existence. But over time, she became something more. He would see her on full moon nights, standing outside a window, waiting for him to appear again. She never called out to him, never begged for his attention. But in her silence, in the way she simply existed, she drew him closer. It was then that I knew. Cherub's voice softened for a moment, the weight of the memory settling in his words. I knew she was the one I had been searching for, without even knowing I was searching at all. A mortal woman, yes, but in her, I found something more than immortality could ever offer. As he finished, there was a long silence in the room. The gods who had once looked down on us now sat in stunned silence, unsure of how to respond. Cherub had revealed the depth of his love, and in doing so, had stripped away the veil of divinity that separated him from the mortal world. His love for her, pure and untainted, had become an obsession, one that would lead to untold consequences. And now, it was too late to turn back. The path he had chosen would destroy him. But Cherub did not care. For him, there was no turning back from the love he had found. And as I looked at him, standing tall before the gods, a cold realization washed over me. There he was, my brother, unwavering, his presence a stark contrast to the frailty of the moment. The gods looked down upon us, their cold eyes like polished stones, implacable, indifferent. But Cherub, standing before them, spoke as if he were the one who held power. And in that instant, I couldn't help but wonder, had we, all of us, become so far removed from mortality that we could no longer comprehend what it meant to truly love, to truly be human? Was it the gods who held the power? Or had we missed something in the lives of those we were supposed to protect, those we were supposed to be above? In the end, perhaps it was the mortals who wielded the truest form of power, the power to love so fiercely, so deeply, that even the eternity we were cursed with seemed insignificant. To them, time was precious because it was fleeting. They didn't take their days for granted. And in their impermanence, they held a kind of strength that even the gods could not fathom. Cherub, still caught in the echoes of his own thoughts, let out a soft laugh. But it wasn't one of joy, it was a bitter, reflective laugh, one that seemed to mock his own naivety. It came from somewhere deep inside him, a place where emotions collided, torn between the love he had for her and the realization of what that love had cost him. The gods might see him as a fool, or worse, but he didn't care. He could feel it, this force, this overwhelming connection to her that refused to be ignored. But then, as he pondered more about the girl, something shifted within him. His laughter faded into a deep silence, a growing curiosity taking root. He began to see her more clearly, not just as the mortal woman who had once captured his heart, but as something more, something extraordinary. His thoughts wandered to the daylight, to the way she moved under the sun, her skin bathed in golden light, her presence like an anchor to the very earth itself. He had first noticed her in the quiet of the night, but now, in the daylight, she seemed even more enigmatic. It was the way the world responded to her, how the birds would flock around her, the creatures of the earth finding solace in her presence. The fishes in the river swam closer to her feet, as though drawn by an invisible force. He had never seen anything like it. It was as if she spoke without words, a silent, ethereal language that transcended sound, a voice only nature itself understood. She was a bridge between worlds, and every being seemed to recognize it, drawn to her by a force they couldn't name. But it wasn't just the way nature bent to her. It was the kindness in her eyes, the purity of her heart that seemed untainted by the darkness of the world around her. Cherub watched her in the small moments, when she smiled at the children in the village, when she offered solace to those in need, or when she tended to the wounded without a second thought. She was not a woman of grand gestures, but of quiet compassion. Every action she took seemed to be imbued with a tenderness that was as rare as it was profound. And yet, even with all that love and light, there was something undeniably human about her. He saw it in the way she carried the weight of the world on her shoulders, though her burden was far greater than any mortal should bear. She fought battles that were not her own, battles of the spirit, battles against the very injustices that threatened to break her. Yet, despite it all, she wore a smile that never faltered, even when the world around her seemed to crumble. She lived, laughed, and learned, even when it would have been easier to fall into despair. She carried on, not because she was invincible, but because her strength came from something far deeper than mere resilience. It was a quiet fortitude, an unwavering belief that no matter how hard life became, she would rise again. Cherub began to see something in her that no one else could. It was not her beauty, though it was undeniable. It wasn't her strength, though it was fierce. It was something more. There was a rare light in her, a brilliance that radiated from her very soul. It was a light that could not be extinguished by time or hardship. It was the kind of light that you only found once in a lifetime, the kind that seemed to shimmer in the cracks of the universe, a gift from the heavens that you couldn't quite touch, but could always feel. And in her, Cherub saw something he could not yet fully understand. Perhaps, in his long, eternal existence, he had forgotten what it truly meant to be human, to love, to sacrifice, to endure. Perhaps it was her humanity that made her so incredibly powerful. It was the very thing that set her apart from everything and everyone else. And now, as he stood before the gods, knowing that his love for her had set him on a path of no return, he realized something. She wasn't just a mortal. She was a reflection of something pure and untouchable, something even the gods had long since forgotten. In that moment, Cherub knew, no matter the cost, no matter the consequences, he would never turn away from her. Because in her, he had found what immortality could never offer. A truth so simple, so profound, that even the eternity he had lived through seemed irrelevant in comparison. Then it was my turn. I stood there, gripped by a quiet panic, wondering how I could possibly articulate the depths of my love for Hex without feeling foolish or, worse, like I was begging for attention that wasn't mine to claim. Unlike cherubs and chrysanthi, whose love was like an open book, filled with clarity and shared devotion, mine with Hex felt like a script. We shared something, but it was veiled, a mixture of longing and silence, built on unspoken understandings rather than words freely exchanged. You might wonder, what's the difference between the two kinds of love? The distinction isn't subtle. When love is bound to paper, it transforms into something more formal, a contract where passions are dictated by desire and lust rather than the free-flowing connection between souls. A love that evolves in the telling, through stories shared between two hearts, becomes a living thing, nurtured with every recounting. It is like a tale that deepens over time, becoming richer, more intricate, woven from the threads of shared experiences. Our love, however, felt more like an arrangement, a tension of power and desire undercut by a lurking emptiness. As I stood there, I could feel my chest constricting with the weight of what I was about to reveal. I longed for someone to hold me, to validate what had been a tumultuous and incomplete bond. And yet, Hexa's desire for me wasn't rooted in affection, it was tangled up in her hunger for control. She sought power, and I was the means by which she could grasp it, a complexity that stretched and entwined our fates in ways that I had never expected. My brother stepped down from the stand, the space between us charged with an unspoken tension. I approached slowly, my gaze cast downward, hands pressed together as if in prayer. I tried to summon the strength to stand before them, to share the story that had led me here. At last, I raised my head, my heart pounding in my chest, the weight of the story hanging heavily in the air. I opened my mouth, my voice steadier than I felt, yet thick with sorrow. Eden, I began, each syllable seeming to choke me. What I had with her. It wasn't simple. It was complex, an amalgamation of passion, pain, and the kind of love that might push you away, make you question everything, or maybe make you feel nothing at all. I hesitated, swallowing hard, then continued, my voice quivering. I wish I could give you a tale of glory, of something that could stand proudly on its own. But what we shared wasn't a story of light, it was bound to the darkness, stitched together by shadows, not sunshine. My throat tightened, the words heavy, each one harder to push through. When I first met her, she was standing at the edge of madness, preparing to poison the river in London. She was consumed by the grief of losing her mother. I stopped her, took her home, hoping she would forget about me. But she didn't. For years, she hunted for me. And I paused, remembering the sensation that always preceded her presence. I could feel her, even before she came close. It was like a pull, something primal, a tangle of envy, obsession, and a strange, intoxicating hunger that we couldn't escape. I closed my eyes for a moment, pulling myself back from the depths of those memories. When I finally saw her again, she didn't want anything else. All she desired was me. My embrace, the warmth of my body, the feel of my lips on her skin. I was Adam, and she was Eve, and I would have given up everything, sacrificed it all for a single moment with her. I would have bitten that apple 1,000 times. My voice faltered, but I pushed on, my words coming faster now. We got lost in each other, in temptation, in indulgence. She sought out favors from gods, from sorcerers, from the powerful. And in the silence between us, in the hours spent in the dark, our bodies became one. I told her stories of magic, of the things I'd seen, things that could shape the world. With each word, each tale, I could feel us coming closer, bound tighter, our souls woven together with every breath. I paused, my hands shaking, my voice trembling. I could feel the floodgates cracking open, emotions threatening to spill over. I wiped my eyes quickly, hoping no one saw the tears I was struggling to hold back. But they were there, flowing like a river that couldn't be stopped. At some point, I even gave her power, my own, the kind of power that was mine to give. And when I did, she disappeared, just like that. I woke up to find her gone, and everything that had once been vanished. The heat of her body wasn't beside me anymore. Her laughter, that beautiful sound I'd grown to cherish, was silent. I felt the tears fall freely now, each one a mark of my vulnerability. I didn't know what to do. I loved her, maybe more than anything. But in that moment, I realized I didn't love her. I loved the idea of having someone to hold, to cling to. And when she was gone, it was as though the world had broken apart. It wasn't just her I lost, it was everything. All of it, gone. I had no anchor left, no one to cling to. Not a lover, not a friend, not even a brother. The room was silent now, the gods' eyes cast down, their faces heavy with understanding or pity. My brothers, they couldn't look at me. They couldn't meet my eyes. And it crushed me. What was I supposed to feel? I said, my voice breaking, my chest tight with the weight of it. What was I supposed to do? When she left, so did the last bit of hope I had. I lowered my head, the tears blurring my vision. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I couldn't offer something better. I'm sorry I'm not the hero you wanted me to be. And with that, I turned and walked away from the stand. Each step felt like a confession. The weight of their gazes on my back was unbearable. They saw me for what I was now, weak, lost, a god brought low, unworthy of the power I once held. As I stood there with my two brothers, the atmosphere grew heavy with anticipation. Our eyes were drawn upward, where, perched high above, he presided over us in a grand display of authority. Judgment, draped in a flowing black robe that seemed to absorb the very light around him, held a gleaming golden scepter in his hand. His skin shimmered like the vastness of space, dotted with twinkling stars, and his face was a mesmerizing blend of swirling galaxies, ever-changing and beautiful. He raised his hand high, a signal of his impending proclamation. Beside him, his enforcer, a rabbit named Wiggles, who towered over us like a kangaroo, spoke with an unexpected gravitas. Wiggles was dressed in a bright green suit, complete with a tiny green hat perched jauntily atop his head. His voice resonated through the room, commanding attention as he declared, "The great judgment has spoken, and he believes the only rightful punishment for the three of you is an individual sentence. Marilyn, however, will not be held accountable." I turned to look at my brother, Marilyn, whose expression seemed a mixture of regret and defiance. Confusion filled my heart as I struggled to comprehend the reality of his situation. My silence was quickly shattered by my brother Cherub, who couldn't contain his fury. "You sold us out, Marilyn, didn't you?" he asked, his voice trembling with betrayal. Marilyn's response was to walk away from us, a wave of disgust washing over my face as he moved closer to the destroyer, a foreboding presence looming on the left side of the room. Gasps erupted from the assembly, disbelief echoing around us. The child of the Creator, leaving his brothers behind for a new allegiance? It was a sight that none of us could fathom. Wiggles continued, his voice deep and resonant. "Marilyn is under the protection of the destroyer, and for the rest of you, Cherub will be condemned to sleep for eternity in the realm of nothingness." His words sent tremors through the entire room, each syllable heavy with finality, sealing our fates in an unyielding grip. My brother Cherub stood tall, his head high, but a single tear escaped his eye, tracing a silent path down his cheek. In the room, there was no need for words, for everyone knew all too well the horror that awaited him, the realm of nothingness. A place where demons, angels, and even gods were sent to be punished. It was a prison of endless slumber, an eternal sleep, where time had no meaning and none could ever awaken. It was the closest thing any of us could experience to death, a finality so cold, so absolute. As he took slow, deliberate steps toward judgment, the weight of everything he was leaving behind seemed to crush him. His son, his people, his legacy, all would be lost to him forever. Cherub would never see them again, never feel the warmth of his son's embrace, never hear the laughter of his people, never feel the pride of his legacy living on. It was as if the very fabric of his existence was being torn away. With one final, trembling voice, weak with sorrow, he spoke, "May my son reign over the Lur and protected his people like I did." His words were barely more than a whisper, a plea, a final act of devotion. His face, streaked with tears, reflected his agony. And in that moment, I could see the man he had been, the hero, the protector, the leader. He was giving everything, his last words, his last breath, to ensure his son would carry on what he had started. Judgment, ever unmoved, raised his hand and touched Cherub's forehead. In an instant, everything about my brother began to change. His eyes clouded over, turning an opaque white, as if his soul had already departed. His skin grew pale, the color of a full moon on a cloudless night. His once vibrant hair turned gray, and with a final anguished gasp, he collapsed to the ground. It was as if his very essence was being undone. His body, once strong and alive, began to disintegrate, crumbling into ashes as though consumed by a fire no one could see. The wind picked up, carrying his ashes into the sky, where they swirled into patterns, twisting like smoke before vanishing into the ether. And just like that, he was gone. I bowed my head low, overwhelmed with shame. I had been granted the privilege of spending these final moments with my brother, yet our relationship had been shattered over something so trivial, so petty. The regret gnawed at me, as I wondered how we had let it all slip away. Then, the voice of judgment spoke again, cold and distant. "Eden, God of man, your punishment is to be turned into a clock. You will feel what it is like to be bound beneath a human, to be nothing more than an object to be used." A surge of horror rippled through me, but before I could even react, judgment raised his fingers again. He summoned a force so powerful that it struck me like a bolt of lightning. I felt myself being thrust downward, crashing back to the earth. My form, once divine, now bound in a state of helplessness, was tethered to that boy, Timothy. And there, in that moment, the weight of my punishment settled over me. This was my new reality, an existence bound to a mortal. The clock that ticked on in the world was now my prison, my endless cycle. It was a cruel twist of fate, but I had no choice. I could either bend to the will of the program, to the rules of this new life, or I could fade away into oblivion. But I refused to fade away. Not like Cherub. He would never have let himself slip into nothingness. He would have stood tall, even in the darkest moments, and turned the dirtiest of tasks into something precious. His spirit, his strength, his resilience would have made the most mundane things seem like gold. He would have learned from his punishment and moved forward with pride, with purpose. That was why they kept me alive, because they didn't see me strong enough to endure. I was meant to crash, to not learn, to live. Like my brother, they took abuses. He was too powerful, too inspirational, too great to let slip away. And in his memory, I would find a way to keep moving forward.